Hi, it's homework time again. For homework, you're going to write up for me the results of your recent practical. First, I'll remind you of the practicals which we did. About a third of the people in the class carried out this practical over here. A piece of pond we called Elodea was placed underneath a funnel. Elodea produces bubbles of oxygen at a certain rate. What you did was you used one or two methods of changing the amount of light intensity which was falling upon Elodea, and you measured the rate at which bubbles were produced. The second practical was chromatography. I don't have a diagram for chromatography, but I do have some results over here. In chromatography, or in the experiment-related chromatography, the groups got a leaf, they crushed it up, they put a dot of the resulting green goop onto a little pencil line at the bottom of a piece of paper. It's a special paper called chromatography paper, and they dipped the bottom of the paper into a solvent, and that solvent ran all the way up the paper, and it carried some of the pigments with it. This technique should have separated out some of the pigments which were inside the leaf, and I quite like the results on the left. There's a green spot at the top, there's a much bigger green spot underneath, and there are some red things underneath. You seem to have separated out three different sorts of pigment which are in the leaf, two green pigments, and some reddy orangey pigments. This is really good, this is totally correct, so I'm very pleased with this practical. There's actually two different sorts of chlorophyll. There's also some reddy and orangey pigments called anthocyanins and carotenes. There's other pigments as well. The third experiment was tricky. We were testing for the presence of carbohydrates in leaves. Groups followed quite a complicated procedure involving boiling the leaf twice, first in water and then in a different solvent, and then testing it with a chemical called iodine. It's an element of the periodic table. Iodine turns black when it's exposed to carbohydrates. Three different leaves were tested: one healthy leaf, under normal conditions in which you'd find a leaf, one leaf which has been covered up by black card, and one leaf which has been in a jar in which there is potassium hydroxide to absorb carbon dioxide. So what you're going to do for me are the following things. I'd like you to write a short account of what you did when you carried out the experiment, only a paragraph or so. I'd like you to display your results in some form. It could be in the form of a graph or a table, or it could just merely be a photograph of what you've done. However you feel is most appropriate. I'd then like you to write what your conclusions are. Of course, spend no longer than 30 minutes on this. Good luck.